Hello, welcome to Letchworth Cable Access. I'm Saul Hauser, and today with me is Duane Whitmer, Libertarian candidate for New York's 27th District in Congress.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
So, can you tell me a little bit about what inspired you to run for Congress and a little bit about your past?
Yes, so I'm an accountant and a small business owner from Hamburg, New York. I'm actually one of the least political politicians you'll ever meet. I wasn't really interested too much in it until recently in 2018 when I had a chance to vote for my representative in Congress. I didn't like my options, and I looked at it and said, "This is America, land of the choice." And if I want to go out to eat, I have multiple different restaurants I can choose from. And I get to that restaurant, I look at the menu, there's multiple options to choose from. And then I go to vote and I have two options. And I'm sick of choosing the lesser of two evils. I'm sick of trying to force these people to represent me or support what I have to say or do. And I said, I can complain about it or I can do something. And the last couple of years have been good for me. I have the ability, the time, the energy, and the financial resources allowed to kind of go out to this district and show people that it's not just two options. There's more than just the two, and we can really kind of take our government back by sending the message to the Republican and Democrat parties that if you're unhappy with them, more people are going to step up and run. And it's consumer-driven politics where the voters get the choice to show the establishment how they feel.
And do you think that message, especially what with Chris Collins pleading guilty to insider trading charges, do you think that message is going to especially resonate this year?
He also moved to Florida, by the way. But yes, I do. I think that as an accountant, I deal with numbers all day, and I don't want to bore you guys with numbers. But in this district, there's about 130,000 unaffiliated, no party voters that tend to lean red. But you saw in 2018 that they were really disappointed and upset. So what they did was they voted for McMurray, the Democrat. And I think that if you give them a candidate that says, look, I don't know everything, I'm not the smartest man in the room, I want you to be able to have the resources you need to make your own decisions. I don't want government to interfere in your life. I want you to be you and be able to be you with as little government interference as possible. I think that resonates really well in a district like this, especially these small communities. A lot of these small towns and small communities are more libertarian than they realize. The LP has an outreach problem. We're a new part. We're not a new party, but we're a growing party. We have an outreach problem and we have a marketing problem where a lot of people don't know what libertarian is. And so that's part of my race is that I'm telling people what we are, what we're for, what we're about. And I think a lot of small towns do have a lot in common with the Libertarian Party. They just don't realize it. So I think this district is primed to start taking the government, like I said, take the government back and put it back in the hands of middle class. No more corporate backed rich people. No more career politicians. So that's kind of why I do think District 27 is ready for this.
And do you think that, especially with that message and trying to get that message out, can you say a little bit about what your message is and your policies and what you kind of hope to do when you're in office?
Absolutely. So I'm a little bit different. I don't always believe that the government has the answers and the solutions. I think the government's really good at identifying problems and creating problems and then stepping in and pretending to solve said problems. The problem with government is fundamentally this. If I'm the government and you have a problem, if I solve that problem, I'm no longer needed. So if they solved homelessness, if they solved poverty, in theory, they would have to stop taking your money to allocate to these resources because there's no longer that problem. They solved it. I don't think that they want to solve the problems. I think they want to identify the problems and keep taking your money and then sending my friends off to war. It's what's been going on. The Iraq War is now 18 years old. It's not going away. I think that's really the concern. So I want to run an educational campaign to show people that the government isn't an all-knowing being, and the government actually creates a lot of the problems they're supposed to solve, and then they further the problems by not solving the problems and then not allowing people to solve the problems on their own. For example, you read in the news from time to time where churches or charities are getting in trouble and fined for feeding the homeless or for feeding the hungry. So you tell churches that they have to do more to help impoverished people, and then you put regulations in place where they can't do that. So you monopolize this market of helping these people, but yet you don't allow competition. And I think the government's really good at that. And so I kind of want to point people out that I don't want to solve your problems. I want to help you have the resources and the ability to solve the problems on your own. And I think, again, in this district, that's the heart of this district. They want to be left alone. They want to live their own life. And so I think that's kind of a message from my campaign.
So you were talking a little bit about the wars that have gone on for a long time in
Yep.
Iraq and Afghanistan,
Hmm.
and one recent development is that the president pulled, or at least started to pull, all of the U.S. troops that were in Syria out,
Yep.
and a lot of people said that that put the allies that supported U.S. troops at risk. So, what would your plan be if you were in Congress? What would you say is the right way to navigate that? And how would you say, what's the balance between reducing our military obligations abroad and still maintaining our connection with our allies?
So I'm a terrible person to ask. I never served. I'm not a veteran, so I don't know a ton of the details that veterans and people that have served know. Um, as much as I'd like to say, pull the band-aid, bring all our troops home from all bases across the world, I do think it would have to be a slow removal, because you will cause a lot of chaos and turmoil. Because this is a sidebar, but a lot of countries say, people use Denmark and Sweden as, they have socialized healthcare, they have all these good programs. Well, that's because we're their defense program. A lot of countries have outsourced their defense program through us for a long time, and it's cost us money. Defense spending is, I think, our third biggest. Social Security and Medicare are number one. I think defense spending is number two, and interest on the debt we accumulate is number three, which is an issue in itself. Our debt is an insurmountable monster we need to control. Um, but if you start to cut defense spending and start to bring these troops home, you do have to do it slow to make sure that you're not, making chaos. But a lot of the issues that, again, like I said earlier, a lot of the issues that you have in the Middle East, we caused by doing what we did. And so, we kind of created the instability that they're now facing. So we have to make sure we do all we can to train them to make sure they can take care of themselves. But if we stop causing the problems, then you're going to see stability come back. We can't be the world police because it's not our job. Um, Unfortunately, we create a lot of issues that, again, the government creates issues that it never plans on solving. And, people talk about climate change. The United States military is one of the biggest polluters in the world. So if you want to work on climate change and working on that, then stop with the wars. So
So
that'll
let's
help.
talk a little bit about climate change,
Let's do it.
actually.
Yep.
So it's pretty clear that the world's facing a climate emergency, and the UN said that the world needs to cut carbon emissions by 7.6% just to next year,
Mhm.
and be completely carbon neutral by 2050 just to keep warming under 1.5 degrees Celsius.
Mhm.
So, how do you believe that we can take responsibility for our effect on the planet and be good stewards of it?
So this is three issues. Well, it's two issues in one. Number one, the issue is, um, whatever your stance on climate change is, you have to acknowledge the fact that we cannot control what other countries do. Um, there are charts that show that countries such as China, India, foreign countries, they're not actually doing well cutting emissions, and the United States is. So we tend to be blamed for a lot of the issues, but yet we're actually solving the problem. We're dealing with it. We're doing what we have to do ourselves. Um, I don't believe the government adding more tax, like a carbon tax or any way to generate money. Like I said back in the beginning, the government's really good at identifying a problem but not solving it. So they're going to add a carbon tax. They're going to ban plastic bags. Cuomo just signed a bill, trying to sign a bill to ban styrofoam. Which, if you actually look at the bill, fun fact, it's actually not banning the styrofoam containers. It's banning a brand of container. So it would be like allowing tissues but banning Kleenex. It's not actually banning all the styrofoam containers, just a specific brand, which doesn't solve the problem. The government stepping in and banning things isn't going to solve it. The answer is letting the market dictate what works and what doesn't. Um, Humans tend to like money, and we tend to be driven and kind of, we want to make a profit. I think if you allow the market to do the research to see what better alternatives are out there, the market's going to solve this problem. And you see it every day. And I read an article, and I'm forgetting what happened, but um, some teenager somewhere created something that can actually help get rid of plastic in the oceans. It's like some 16-year-old girl, and the government didn't do that. It wasn't the government solving that. It was a teenager. And if we focus on letting that develop and giving them ways to develop their product and have that education where they're learning and they're developing things, that's going to help. The government just putting a tax in and adding regulations, it's a band-aid. It's like putting a band-aid on an axe wound. The market will determine what works and what doesn't. We just have to let it do its job by not regulating it so heavily. I tend to think, and this is kind of a bad anecdote, but um, since I've been alive, I've seen a lot of politicians say the world's going to end, the polar ice caps are going to melt. I'm a terrible person for driving a vehicle. But a lot of these politicians then don't practice what they preach. Um, what was it? They took, 70 private jets to a summit on climate change. Well, why didn't you guys all ride together and take bikes? You didn't do that. So, I mean, I'd like to see them lead by example if they really want to see some things change. Instead of blaming us for their problems, blaming people in small towns that have to travel 30, 40 miles to grocery shop, instead of saying it's their reason, their fault why there's climate change, start being leaders and practice what you preach.
All right, thank you. Now, speaking of small towns, actually,
Yep.
in Wyoming County, our biggest industry is dairy farming.
Yes.
And dairy farmers have been under a lot of pressure lately. There have been years of really unsustainably low milk prices, and then lately with trade wars and tariffs, it's been a lot of pressure on the price of milk.
Yep.
So, how would you be a voice for dairy farmers in the area?
So my father's a dairy farmer in Arcade, actually, and so I wish he was here. He would tell me what to say, and he'd have all these good ideas. Um, to help dairy farmers, I have a tax plan that's going to help a lot of the middle and working class, and I'd like to talk about that if we have time. As an accountant, I can talk taxes for days. It'd bore the hell out of you guys, and I'm not going to do that. But there are a couple things with farmers. If we can cut their taxes by cutting actual, small business and individual taxes for lower and middle class people, that's going to help them have more money in their pocket. If we start to cut the regulations that the dairy farmers go and have to deal with on a day-to-day basis and open up the markets and allow them to do more with their product and focus on, if you cut regulations, it actually makes it cheaper for them to do certain things. For example, I know my dad, he butchers cows every so often too, and he has a trouble finding an FDA certified butcher because he doesn't have enough volume. So the smaller farms are kind of dealing with larger costs because you get a volume discount. If we can figure out why, and the answer is the regulations that the butcher and other places have to deal with from the FDA, if you kind of lax those, you're going to be okay. These regulations have come about recently when, bigger companies such as like the Tysons and these big corporate farmers have lobbied Congress to pass bills and more regulations to make it harder for the smaller farmer. We're pricing them out of the market. If you allow these regulations to go away that weren't in place 50 years ago and people were fine 50 years ago, you're going to be able to open up more markets and allow them to make more money. So that's kind of my plan for them, is making sure that they're represented by doing that.
So one of the things you mentioned was in terms of cutting taxes for
Yes.
the lower middle class.
Yes.
And here I have a chart of
Yes, I
the
saw that.
tax cuts from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017.
Yep.
And it's a graph from Fortune magazine. It shows how the tax cuts were distributed among groups. And the bottom 60% of earners were able to take home less than 2% more pay, while the top percent took home almost 14% more. So how do you plan to level the playing field?
So this actually, unfortunately, people can use statistics to look a certain way, and this is an example of it. This actually proves that higher earners pay more in taxes because it actually cut tax rates. So if you pay more in taxes, they cut your tax rate, you pay less in taxes, you get a better savings. My tax plan actually doesn't affect tax rates, kind of. It actually affects the deductions that people write off, and in doing so directly impacts middle and working class. If you eliminate the student loan interest cap, right now it's capped at $2,500. If you eliminate that, you can write off more on your taxes, you have a lower taxable income. Childcare right now, it's you can write off up to $3,000 per kid, and you get like a $600 credit, up to $600 credit based on your income. I want to move that so you can actually deduct what you pay in daycare from your income, up to a certain amount, 10 grand, something like that, which directly impacts working people. Another example would be health insurance premiums. I know we've talked about that. Is I want people that pay for their health insurance out of pocket after taxes, I want them to be able to write that off on their taxes as well, because that's something that directly impacts the middle class. They're paying a lot for healthcare. So if they can write off their premiums, that's going to lower their taxing. Because if you think about it, you're essentially paying taxes on the premiums you pay. You're paying tax on your daycare because it's not being deducted on your taxes. So you're paying tax on something and then paying these bills out of pocket. And it's pretty harmful. So if we kind of acknowledge that, plus it takes money out of the hands of Congress and spending, which then it forces them to acknowledge the problem. Because as soon as you start to take their tax dollars away, they're going to be mad because they want to spend it. I would also cut the federal gas tax. I think that should be gotten rid of. It's like 25 cents a gallon. I'd like to see that go away, which that directly helps farmers, people in small towns that have to travel, people that commute to work. You're going to see a direct savings in your at the pump. And New York's one of the highest taxed states in the union, so you're gonna like that. Anything we can do, and then to solve this problem, is we're going to cut spending. And I'm not just going to say cut spending. I'm going to tell you exactly what we're going to cut. We're going to cut the defense spending by not going to war. You're going to save almost $1 trillion a year doing that. You're going to cut foreign aid. I have a hard time understanding why we send all this money to foreign countries when they really don't care what happens to us. And if you cut foreign aid, you cut defense spending, you're making up for these cuts, and then you have money left over. So you're putting more money in people's pockets and actually cutting the deficit all in one. As an accountant, that's one thing I provide a fresh experience, is that as an accountant, I deal with financial statements and budgets all the time, and I think there should be more of us in office because we don't have a balanced budget. We haven't had one in years. We have a $23 trillion debt and growing. We're kicking the can down the street. And if we don't acknowledge that, we're doomed. And so I think that's one thing that really needs to be focused on and hammered. And I provide kind of a different experience when it comes to that, because as an accountant, I deal with budgeting every day. So, yeah.
So one of the things that you had brought up was about healthcare spending and
Yep.
health insurance.
Mhm.
And for a lot of people, they face healthcare costs they can't afford, so they ration medication, they put off surgeries, and they don't get insurance because it's just too much money. So how do you help people that can't afford insurance or medication or procedures?
There's a chart from the 70s that actually shows when government got involved in healthcare. And actually, you can do student loans and college education in this too. But when government got involved in healthcare, costs skyrocketed. Well, why? Well, it's simply because they added a bunch of regulations that weren't needed that caused hospitals and doctors' offices to have to hire more admin. If you hire an admin, that's a cost on you that you have to make up, so you have to raise the prices. If we start to let loosen regulations and allow people to have more free market ability options, you're going to see costs go down. Also, there's a study that was done, and I question the validity of this study, but I do believe it's pretty true, is that out of the 535 people in the House and Congress and Senate in the House, 490 of them, 495 of them, something like that, have received money from Big Pharma. So part of the issue you have is, and this actually can go to some of the farmer questions too, is that um, Big Pharma is dominating, their lobby is dominating congressional donations. So what happens is, if they're buying politicians, which is essentially what they're doing, you give a donation to a politician, you're essentially buying them because you're asking for a favor later. I have, by the way, not received any money from Big Pharma. I don't think they're going to donate to me because they don't like my ideas. But they're allowed to control the market through Congress. And if you kind of focus on that and you allow the competition to come back up, and they lobbied Congress to put a lot of regulations in place. If you loosen those regulations and allow competition, you're going to have, again, like I said earlier, more options is lower pricing, it's supply and demand. Another thing, and this would help farmers, is I do believe that hemp and cannabis should be completely decriminalized and completely legalized. I do also believe that addiction should be a mental health issue, not a criminal issue. But how this helps farmers is a lot of these dairy farmers have a lot of land. And if you allow them to grow hemp or cannabis, um, you're going to see a lot of money coming into them, which directly benefits small towns. But by legalizing and allowing the grow of cannabis, you're actually, it's a waterfall effect, because you need transportation, you need people to cut it, you need people to package it, you need people to ship it. So you're actually opening up more jobs in these small towns, because the city of Buffalo or Hamburg, where I'm from, we don't have the land needed to plant these crops. So it's going to force these farming communities, to have to hire more people and bring more people in. That's a short-term effect because of supply and demand. If a lot of people do it, you're going to have a lot of supply, which can help with the demand. But if you allow medical marijuana, you're going to see a lot of the big pharma lose their power, and a lot of these options that are out there that are cheaper. That's a lot cheaper. I have my stepbrother unfortunately passed due to heroin, and the reason why he was addicted was it started with pain pills, and you're seeing that a lot, especially with older people. I hear a lot of people. I was at an event, I forget where I was. I want to say it was Alden, and a lot of older people were coming up to me and saying that they pay like $1,000 a month for their prescription pills. And it's a lot of pain meds. It's a lot of stuff to help them. It's pain meds, and it's the side effects of pain meds, and then it's dealing with the side effects of the side effects from the pain meds. And if you allow them to do medicinal cannabis, you eliminate that whole cost right there. So that's going to save a ton of money. Plus, by cutting taxes, I don't believe that Social Security income should be taxed. Right now, the tax law allows it that if you make more than $25,000 in your household, your Social Security income could be taxed. I don't think that it should be taxed at all. I think it should be taxed zero, and that's going to actually help a lot of the elderly people in their households. So keep some more money in their pocket. So doing certain things like that would help a lot of those issues.
So one of the things you talked about in that was about how political donations have influenced a lot of the decisions of people in Congress.
Mm-hmm.
So is there something that you would do if you were elected that would help kind of tamp that down?
I don't know. The libertarian philosophy is that um, political donations are free speech, and for Congress there are caps. I can only accept $2,800 per individual or per corporate donor. Now, nothing prevents the LLC loophole with this is that nothing prevents me from opening 50 LLCs, and each 50 LLC donates $2,800 to each or to a candidate, so that's how they can raise more money. Um, I think that it's an education reform is needed. I think people need to start analyzing these candidates and seeing where their money is. OpenSecrets.org is a great website, and it actually specifies where a lot of these candidates get their money from. It analyzes their FEC reports. I have to file a quarterly FEC report and specify any of my I think it's over $200. I have a financial team that does it. But anything over $200 has to be broken out and identified. And OpenSecrets.org actually analyzes these reports and shows people where they're getting their money from. And I think if you start to analyze where these people are getting their money from, you can kind of see where their allegiances lie. And I think that should be a more education reform.
All right, thank you. And one of the other things that you had also mentioned was about
Firearms.
Social Security.
Also, yep. So,
No, what were you saying?
Social Security. Go ahead. Yep.
Okay. So it's kind of back to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act.
Yep.
It would seem to be directly in line with the values of cutting down on government spending and taxation on people.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, a lot of people do depend on Social Security for their income and for their retirement. And with that law, a lot of experts have estimated that there won't be funding left for Social Security in just a few years. So how will you ensure that people are able to retire happily and be able to be financially stable?
The reason why the funding's not there is because a study was done that shows that Congress taps into the money for Social Security to fund war and their congressional staff salaries. There was a study done, I forget who did it, I wish I remembered, I read this a couple of years ago, but Congress actually taps into the money for Social Security to fund war and their office salaries. So we're essentially stealing from the individuals, and I think this is an absolutely a shame and it's atrocious. But because they can't balance a budget, because they can't make 1 + 1 = anything, because they're too busy infighting and patting themselves on the back for passing regulations that don't matter, we have to raid the funding for Social Security. The best thing to do is if you cut spending by, cut war spending, cut a lot of these programs that are unnecessary, cut foreign aid. As soon as you do that, you're going to have more money, which will allow you to replenish those reserves. That's the problem right now and this is an issue I have with a lot of government programs, is that the government takes your money. Like I said earlier, they cause the problem. They identify the problem, they try to fix it by taking your money. But yet they don't apply it to the problem. And Social Security is a good example of this. They have this money sitting there, and because they're greedy politicians, that they get a federal pension after a couple of years of service, unlike the average American who has to rely on Social Security. They don't care what happens to that money, so they essentially steal it and fund war. And I think that one thing I'd like to see, and this will never happen, I would need a lot of help to have this happen, is if I was elected, I would push a bill that would eliminate congressional pensions. I don't understand why you can get to live off the taxpayer for $185,000 a year for a handful of years and then retire and make $135,000 a year for the rest of your life. I think that's atrocious, and it furthers why people become career politicians. I think that's a good backdoor way to get rid of, to establish term limits, because a lot of these people stay in office for the pension. They don't do much. They make, like I said, $184,000 a year plus a federal pension, and they become leeches. And I think that if you eliminate the federal pension and tell the Congress, hey, you now have to do what you're telling the average American to do, and that's save money, open your own IRA. You now have to do what you're telling these people to do. Maybe they'll start taking our problems more seriously.
Well, it looks like we're almost out of time,
Yep,
so I'm going to just ask you if there's anything else that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to.
I would. I would like to talk about my firearm policy. Um, I'm probably the most pro Second Amendment candidate on the ballot because I am a victim of the SAFE Act. When the SAFE Act was passed, I had a concealed carry permit, and my firearm that I carried concealed was factory standard 10 round. The 7 round limit came out, and overnight I became from a 25-year-old accountant, married, living in the suburbs, driving an SUV with a golden retriever, to essentially potentially a violent felon for no reason. A lot of these SAFE Act violations and potential violations are victimless crimes. And that's one thing the Libertarian Party does rail against is essentially wasting government resources for victimless crimes. If I have a concealed carry permit and I have a 10 rounds or 15 rounds in my firearm, no one can say that they're financially, emotionally, physically, psychologically damaged from that. There's no harm. But yet, I now am going to be separated from my family, potentially have my life ruined, potentially killed over a crime with no victim. And so that's kind of why I became pro 2A. A lot of people say, well, the Second Amendment keeps government at check. It's more to say, the civilians deserve equal protection and equal firepower to what the government has. And I agree with that. I think that if you're a good politician, you shouldn't be afraid of your constituents having firearms. Because if you make sure that they're happy, they're not going to revolt. But yet they're not making sure we're happy. We have 535 people in the House that don't care about the 330 million people they represent. They care more about themselves. And so in dealing with this, I think there is a fear there. And you see it in Virginia right now. Virginia just passed this law, and then a lot of sheriffs spoke out and said, we're not going to enforce it. And then they passed another law saying any civil service person that doesn't enforce this law can be fired. They're clearly afraid. But if you're good at what you do and you actually represent the people, you're not going to have to be afraid. And a lot of these politicians no longer do that. They represent corporate interests, they represent the wealthy, and not the everyday working class person. So it's a matter of allowing them to do what they want. And your body, your choice. You can defend yourself with whatever you choose to do. It's not my job to protect you. It's your job to protect you and your family. And if you do it with a certain firearm, more power to you.
So we've seen 288
Yes.
school shootings, to kind of stay on a similar topic, between
Yep.
2009 and 2018, and 6 other industrialized nations, Canada, the UK, France, Germany, Italy, and Japan, with a population about 35% larger than the US, saw only 1.7% of the number
Yep.
of school shootings. So how would you make sure to balance the rights of gun owners with the safety of...
One thing that people aren't going to love when I say this is that they focus on certain statistics. They say, well, all these school shootings, they've used a certain type of weapon. We need to ban that weapon. You're putting a Band-Aid on an axe wound. We're not focusing on why this incident is occurring. And so we're not solving the underlying problem. We're kicking the responsibility down the street or down the road, and we're not focusing on why that issue is there. And that's because politicians don't know the answer. We have a cultural problem in this country. We have a respect issue in this country. A lot of the mass shooters are from single-parent households. We don't acknowledge that. A lot of them, they're all in public schooling. They're all in government schooling. A lot of them are on big pharma medicines, this is an issue that we're not addressing. And also another really, really correlating fact is that a lot of these shootings are happening in gun-free zones. One thing I never understood is if I go to DC, I have to go through Secret Service agents, I have to go through metal detectors, I have to go through, a lot of armed security. When I go to fly, there's armed security. When I go to a concert at Darien Lake, there's armed security at the door. When I go into some banks in Buffalo, there's armed security at the door. When I go to when I actually go to the IRS building, when I go as an accountant, I represent people in front of the IRS all the time. And when I go to do that, I have to go through the Department of Homeland Security. I give them my firearm, they check it in for me, I get it when I get back. Yeah, we go to school boards or we go to school districts, and they're protected with signs that say, "Hey, no guns," and there's a big metal or a big glass window. The logic doesn't apply there. A lot of these shootings are happening in gun-free zones because as a criminal, we tend to not think like a criminal. As a criminal, I understand that I have the dominant firepower if I'm going into a gun-free zone. It doesn't matter if I have a musket, a BB gun, a pellet gun, a fully automatic rifle, which they're illegal in New York State anyways, or a cannon for all that matters. They know that they're the dominant firepower. There's actually been a study that was done showing that school districts. Now, I'm not saying we arm teachers that, hey, Mr. Smith, first day on the job, you're a history teacher, here's your gun, here's your badge, Wild Wested all day. That's not the solution. That's not what I'm saying. But I know, especially in small towns like where we are now, in Perry, a lot of these teachers also have their concealed carry permits. They don't need to open carry it like they're sheriffs, but that risk, if I'm a criminal and I know there's a chance that someone is also armed and I'm not going to be the only one with a gun, it's going to deter them. You see it in, I believe, Sandy Hook. He killed himself when the police arrived. You heard sirens. The guy in Colorado, same thing. When the police showed up, he surrendered. As soon as someone with a gun responds, and you're seeing these shootings that are being prevented by people with firearms, as soon as someone shoots back, they're done. They're giving up because they're no longer in charge. It's about power. It's about control. It's about being in charge. And as soon as they're not in charge, they give up because they don't want that. So I do believe planting that, and I think that's what keeps a lot of criminals honest, is that if I'm a criminal and I'm in your neighborhood and you have a sign that says, and it could be anything, ADT, home security protection, beware of dog, an NRA sticker, anything that was a deterrent to a criminal, they're going to stop and second guess their next action. Your neighbor, now on the other hand, if he has a sign that says, guns are bad, no one should have guns, he doesn't have security lighting, he has a weird schedule, stuff like that, where he's an easier target. Criminals pick the softest targets. And so if we can make these harder targets, it's a short-term fix to the underlying problem. That's a cultural problem in this country. We have an educational and cultural problem in this country. And I think that, unfortunately, in my office, there's not much I can do to fix the culture, except maybe make people happier by giving them more money in their paycheck and keeping the government off their back. But that kind of starts locally, and it starts, individually. And we need to start respecting each other more. We need to start caring about each other more. And that's one thing that, again, small towns tend to do is, when a snowstorm happens, you're plowing your neighbor's driveway, your neighbor gets stuck, you're pulling them out, you're helping your neighbor, you're helping each other, you care about each other. And we kind of have to bring that back. And until then, it's going to be tough. So.
All right, thank you.
Okay,
And thank you for coming in and sharing your perspective. It was really great talking to you.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. This has been great.
Thank you for watching Letchworth Cable Access. This was Duane Whitmer, Libertarian candidate for the 27th Congressional District. I'm Saul Hauser, and have a good night.
Bye, guys.